Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Faith Focus Weekly Discipleship Podcast. My name is Kevin Rogness, and I'm the Discipleship Director here at Faith Covenant Church. And as always, I just want to encourage you to make sure you subscribe, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on any of the podcasting platforms. We just want to make sure that you never miss an episode. And so today, we are wrapping up our 3-episode arc about the seasons of life. And to have that conversation and wrap that up, I'm joined once again by Pastor Char, our expert on all things seasons of life. I've decided.
No, that's not. No.
No, I have decided that you are that. You are a pastor of seasons of life. So that is my decision.
Seasons of life pastor.
I like that. I think it's a good, I think that works.
Oh.
So what seasons are we talking about today? Because we've talked about kind of in the previous episodes, we talked about birth up to 18, kind of that childhood years. Last week, we talked about kind of those establishing years and into the building years. So where are we now?
Now we are in the midlife transition years and the golden years. So
is midlife transition a nice way of saying midlife crisis?
No.
Okay.
For some.
It doesn't have to be a crisis.
It doesn't have to be a crisis. No,
there may be one, but...
There might be one, yeah. So the midlife transition years are roughly 45 to 65, and then the golden years are 65 on up till you go meet Jesus.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So what are some of the defining pieces of each of these seasons?
Yeah. So I'm in the midlife transition year myself.
Are you
54.
having a midlife crisis right now? Do we need to talk about that?
My midlife crisis happened at age 40, so it was a little bit early. That's when God called me into pastoral ministry when I was 40.
There you go.
Yeah. Who knew? God knew.
I didn't. I didn't know you then.
No. So that was 14 years ago now. But the midlife transition year is kind of characterized by letting go. It's interesting. I'm in a spiritual direction certificate program at North Park Seminary right now, and we had to read a class for our book for our intensive in July. And one of the chapters in that book was about transitions, and the gal kind of outlined this midlife transition piece and defined it as a season of letting go, where you're old enough. We talked about this a little bit the last time, where you're old enough and further enough along that you're able to look back on your building years and prior, and some things you may go, oh yeah, this is good, and a lot of times you might go, oh, this is not quite what I had in mind. This isn't what I hoped for myself or my children or my marriage or my family or any, this what I was building towards didn't turn out the way I expected it to or wanted it to. So it's a season of letting go, looking back and reflecting, and then just letting go of the dreams, the hopes, the expectations of things that you were building for, and receiving what is, and then trusting God with what's yet to come. So just releasing. We have a lot of expectations that we build towards.
Yeah.
Especially during those building years.
Yeah.
And some of them may turn out the way we wanted, and some may not. So,
yeah. And just because things don't turn out the way you wanted doesn't mean they turned out bad or that you're not grateful or unhappy.
Right.
It's just like, oh, this happened instead of this. Huh.
Yeah. How did I get here? How did that person get there? How did this happen? Yeah.
Especially how did that person get there? No.
Right. Well, sometimes. Yeah.
So then what are some of the defining features of the golden years then?
So the golden years in retirement, so another piece of the midlife transition, if you have children, is there. The empty nest is beginning upon you. So in the golden years, you're generally retired, although I know more people right now in their 70s and 80s who are still working for a variety of reasons. But more often than not, people are retired in those golden years. So then that's a whole nother transition of identity again, and purpose and value, and your voice changes as you get older, not your literal voice that speaks, but the value of your voice in conversations shifts a little bit, because the young adults and the building people, they're the ones who are growing in their authority and their influence. So in the workforce, that's whose voice is heard and that's who's leading, and you don't have as many opportunities to lead once you retire, so your voice is quieter and softer and more on the fringe. instead of kind of the cutting edge, the center, the one that everyone focuses on and
Sure.
listens to. So that can be a difficult transition. Kids are generally out of the house. Grandchildren are coming, which is a whole nother season
Yep.
and transition. How do you grandparent well? How do your relationships with your adult children change as they become parents? If you don't have kids, it's who do I spend time with now? And other people, like your nieces and nephews, will be, when you're in these years, they'll be adults.
That's scary to think about.
Yeah. So then how do you relate to them and their children in those adults? So kind of the maintaining of relationships over changing seasons for you and for them changes. And also in the golden years, you're looking at the end of your life. And there's the health issues start creeping up and become more and more center of people joke about how you get together when you're old and you just talk about your health problems. And I mean, some of that's true because that's your current reality is things start to break down for some more than for others in your later years. So there's a lot more time spent with aches and pains and doctor's appointments and cancers and other things that creep up and death and loss. There's a lot of losses in the golden years. So I'll just stop there for now.
That's all right. So what would you describe as the work of these two seasons?
I think the work in the midlife transition years is that letting go and trusting God in new ways and just looking to God's leadership.
It's interesting to think of letting go as work. How do you define that as work?
It is.
If you're letting go.
I think it takes great work to stop being in, maybe it's a control piece that, when you're letting go, you're really releasing control of something and saying, this is out of my hands, and realizing maybe it always was. But you just thought you had more control than you really did over things.
Sure.
But it's work to hold back and to just let others lead, or to let kids and grandkids do their thing, or to let the next generation who's coming up, to let their voice be louder or heard, to acknowledge that things are changing around you and culture looks quite a bit different after a decade for everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody. 40 years passes and
things look different.
Things look different 40 years in.
Things look different 20 years ago.
Right. Yeah. So there's figuring out, what you're not cutting edge on some things and you don't fully understand some things, so you're dependent to a degree on those who are younger than you to help navigate some of that, and that's work. That's definitely work. And
what would you say is the work of the golden years then?
I would say the work of the golden years is that trusting of God, again, with, like, for a Christian, trusting God for eternity, and realizing that you still have a voice. It might look different and it might feel different, but finding your voice maybe in different ways would be a good work to put it for someone in their golden years, because you still have influence, you still have a voice. So people can spend their golden years looking back with regret or looking back with longing of how things used to be, which isn't, some of that is healthy and normal and natural, but to live there and to camp there isn't really helpful and isn't really productive, because it can be a sad thing if you just focus on what used to be instead of looking to God at what is. So I guess seeing the joy in today and seeing the value in a life well lived.
One thing's too, like, I know you're involved with our grandparenting ministry, and like a lot of what they kind of talk about is leaving a good legacy, and that's kind of, I think, part of that work too. What would you say about, like, this idea of leaving a legacy?
Super important. And it being spiritually intentional in the lives of your grandchildren is kind of what we talk about in the Grand Disciples, about being intentional. You can hope your grandkids catch some of the things by watching you live, but it's so much richer if you actually have conversation with them and intentionally pour into them spiritually, and at all their ages and in all their seasons. Because grandparents are the second most influential voices in the lives of a child after their parents. So parents, obviously, or caregivers, have primary influence, but grandparents are second only to parents. So there's huge opportunity.
Yeah.
You can play with your grandchildren and have fun with them, and that's all wonderful memory making. But you can also, in addition to that, be spiritually intentional and help the parents raise godly children.
And I know some things that some grandparents wrestle with is maybe their children have their adult children are maybe not going to church regularly or not discipling their children. So that's kind of an odd dynamic too, because now the grandparents are maybe the main disciplers of their grandchildren, and their adult children may or may not want that. What's that dynamic kind of like? Because I know you talk to a lot of grandparents about that kind of situation.
Yeah, and that moves into some of the challenges of the season. That would be a big challenge in the golden years, and even the midlife transition years. If your adult children don't embrace your faith and don't embrace the faith that you raised them in, or maybe you as a parent came to trust Jesus later on in life, and your kids didn't have that. I mean, there's a lot of grief and loss too as you get older. Every change brings about a degree of loss, which brings grief with it. So even positive changes, you move to a new house, that's all positive, but you're also losing a familiar routine for a season, and you're losing neighbors that you knew, and things that were comfortable are not, you're not quite settled in.
And the sentimental memories and all that.
Yeah. So all change brings about loss and grief. So by the time when you're in your 20s, you haven't experienced it just because you're young. You haven't experienced that much change. But by the time you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, you've accumulated this much change. So then somebody will say, I've heard this said a number of times, well, how come that person is so worked up about this little thing? It's just a little thing. And I'm like, yeah, that's the 800th little thing this person has had to adjust to in the last few years. So that we call that cumulative loss. So change just builds in time, and it accumulates, and all of a sudden there's a lot of loss. And that even exaggerates in the golden years when you're not working anymore. So there's an identity piece and a purpose piece. And there's the influence piece we talked about, the perceived influence piece. But then there also become mobility issues. I don't have my own home anymore because I can't maintain it. So now I'm in a townhome, or I'm in an apartment, or I'm in a senior building. Or I can't drive anymore. I can't walk very well anymore. I can't take walks outside anymore. I can't, just the physical limitations, or I'm sick, or I spend all my time going to see a doctor, and then you start losing people. People start dying when they get older. So there's all kinds of that.
When I think too, part of what we're saying is you may wrestle with your identity once you're not able to be as physically active as you'd like to be or used to be. Or you're not finding as much purpose outside of work. And I think that then points to the need for us to really root ourselves in Christ and put our identity in Christ before you get to that point, so that when you do get there, it's not so jarring and not so shocking, and it's easier to make that adjustment.
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as if working for the Lord, not for men, is a verse that I go back to often. And I mean, even if you're not like at work doing a job you're getting paid for, whatever work you're doing, you have a choice on how you perceive that. Are you making dinner for your grandchildren and your adult children? Are you serving Thanksgiving? Well, that's great work to do, and you can do that with joy, and you can choose to serve. Choose is a big word.
Yes.
That's a big word.
Oh, absolutely.
They say that life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond to what happens to you.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, we, to a large degree, we choose our attitude and our response to loss and to change and all that. So, yeah.
And I also just can't help but think that, too, when we talk about in the golden years, that potential loss of mobility, that then also gets into a lot of parallels with people who are maybe much younger but are experiencing loss of mobility due to an injury or a disability or a medical condition. And so I just kind of want to acknowledge that there may be some overlap in those physical conditions. It may not be the same in terms of like having grandchildren and stuff like that, but some of those physical issues have some overlap with maybe younger people that are experiencing loss of mobility and that sort of thing too.
Absolutely, yeah. My husband had a knee replacement when he was 47, which is just due to a fluky one in a million thing that happened.
Yeah.
And that was a source of grief for a season, because all of a sudden he like aged 20 years, 30 years in the matter of one surgery. And he like, you will never in your life do this again. You will never again do this. You'll never again do this. So yeah, that was not season of life appropriate for that to happen. And he's worked through that, but yeah.
So then, backtracking a little bit, what are some of the joys of each of these seasons?
Oh, so many joys. In the
and you're a very joyful person, and you're in one of those seasons. So,
not always joyful, but I try.
Yeah.
But
you're one of the more joyful people I know, I would say.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you. You bring joy to us.
Oh, good. I think for the midlife transition years, for many of us who are parents, our kids are approaching empty nest, and our kids are hopefully thriving and hopefully becoming responsible human beings and adults. So there's joy in launching kids that are thriving or that are able to support themselves, and there's a refound joy. Refound, is that a word? No. Renewed joy. There you go. For many marriages, when all of a sudden you have time for each other. But I do have to say that can also be a difficult time for marriages. If all the time and attention has been on the kids and the kids leave, that can be a really difficult season for marriages too. But it can be a great source of joy to have freedom, time. Kids are expensive. It's expensive raising kids. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
But you don't have those expenses. They get off your health insurance. They get off your grocery bill. You have space. You have
if you
money.
want to downsize your home, that's an option.
Yeah. You can travel and only pay for two of you.
Yeah.
Or one of you, or So there's some of that. There's also, I don't know how to put this. The word that came to mind was coasting, but that's not really the right word. But in the building years, like career-wise, like work-wise, you're striving and you're growing and you're moving and your voice is getting bigger and your influence is getting greater in your career. At the end of your career, you start looking beyond that, and there's not a need to strive for the next thing. It's not like you're coasting till you retire, but you can kind of enjoy the building that's happened and enjoy hopefully where you're at.
Yeah. The fruits of your labors in a lot of ways. Yeah.
And look towards that next season and start dreaming and envisioning. So that's kind of
maybe a time of greater rest in some ways.
Yeah. My husband's retiring in June at the end of this school year. So we're starting that dreaming process. And that's joyful.
Oh, yeah.
So that's kind of fun. I would say in the golden years, the early golden years, my parents had a ton of fun in their early golden years. It was almost like they were back in college. All these new retired people were like playing and getting together for card games and meals and fun playthings and field trips and just really enjoying that freedom of not working. For some, that's a tough transition. For some, that's a hard identity transition to not work anymore.
I literally cannot imagine my dad not working.
Yeah.
I think you would go insane.
Yeah.
My mom, I think she'd be more ready to retire, but my dad's just a person who has always worked. Yeah. And so I just can't imagine him not having something to work on.
Yeah.
Even if it's not paid work, but I think he'll just always be someone that needs something physical to work on.
Yeah. Well, I hope it goes without saying that everything I'm mentioning is a generalization.
Yes.
This is not a one size. Not everybody retires at 65 or 67.
Yeah.
Many people choose to work a lot. My father-in-law worked into his late 70s.
Yeah.
Just because he made part-time at the end, but just enjoyed it. So, so not everybody goes cold turkey when they retire either. But there's different type of time available, and enjoying grandchildren. I hear grandchildren is the best thing ever. So there's
my parents are really enjoying
joy in the grandchildren years. But being able to, I guess, enjoy the fruits of your labor and have things you don't worry so much about money when you're older if you've been wise through your years. So there's a lot of joy. Yeah.
And then what are some of the unique challenges to each season? We've addressed some, but I'm sure there's a few more as well.
Yeah. So the midlife transition years, some of the challenges can be relational. Launching adult kids can be a bumpy road for some parents as they relate to their kids for a variety of reasons. Some marriages have a hard time that bumpy season. Some people find at the end of their season they just don't like what they're doing, like work-wise. They don't like what they're doing, and they can't imagine another how many years. And some of that ends up with the midlife crisis piece that I want to switch careers at age 50 because I cannot imagine doing this for another 15 years. I'm sick of it, and or it's not meaningful anymore. So some of that is people just making a change, thinking I don't want my best years here, my good years to be doing something I don't enjoy. So some people make a radical shift for that reason. It's not that it's necessarily this crisis thing, but just because they want to have meaning and purpose in their later work years. So some of that can be a challenge. It can also be a challenge in the midlife transition. You've heard of the sandwich generation, where you have your parents are aging. So I'm beginning in that. Our parents, three of our four parents between Kirk and I are in their 80s, and there's some health issues that are cropping up. So there'll be more of that as our parents age, and yet we still have young adult children we're launching and supporting and pouring into. Eventually there'll be grandchildren, God willing, in the right time.
I know you already love your grandpuppy, so
I do, yeah. But so that sandwich generation where you're a builder, or you're a earlier, or maybe even a later midlife transition person, and your parents are still alive, but they need your care, and then you have younger people that need you also. So you're kind of caught in the middle of that sandwich piece. So that can be a challenge for people in the midlife transition. The golden years, loss of, we've mentioned those losses, and death. A lot of people lose friends, lose spouses, lose family members, lose a home to call their own, lose their mobility, lose their health, lose their eyesight, lose their
independence,
mobility, all that independence,
One, and that's just really hard for any younger generations to be watching grandparents go through that, and children to watch their parents go through that. And so that, I think we just need to be cognizant of, as our loved ones enter the challenges of the golden years, that we understand how that affects us as well, that are younger, and just kind of be aware of that and take care of ourselves through that too. What would you say are some of the pitfalls of the season, which we've kind of been defining in these last couple episodes as like points where you're stuck and not making any sort of progress?
I think in the midlife transition, pitfalls might be looking back with regret over some things and getting stuck there, beating yourself up over some things. Oh, I wish I would have, if I had known it would be this way, I wish I would have done this.
And it's okay to look back and acknowledge mistakes, or acknowledge ways you could have done something better. But then there's a different piece of like sitting in that, and just living in that regret. Adjustment disorder, they call it sometimes, in that midlife, or in any season really, like an adjustment disorder. If you're having trouble, disorder is probably a strong word, but having trouble with the adjustment to an empty nest, that can be a painful thing, especially for moms, stereotypically for moms, when you've just poured into your kids and so enjoyed them, and now they're not here anymore. That can be a lonely time. So that would be a pitfall, or I don't know what to do with myself now, or I don't know kind of who I am anymore, or looking at your spouse, I don't know who you are anymore, and how have we become this? And so a pitfall. I think a pitfall for the senior years is to be frustrated and inwardly focused too much. And naturally that happens when you're not feeling well and you've got a lot of loss. There's a lot of that introspection. They talk about the life review. Our seniors look back and want to talk about how things used to be. But if you do that at the expense of enjoying today and
also, I was told a long time ago that the greatest gift that you can give to your grandchildren is the gift of hope for their future. Hope for their future.
Yeah.
Instead of, oh, I'm sorry, oh, the world is terrible right now, and oh, all this horrible stuff, and you can really burden your grandchildren and your adult kids with the way it was when we were growing up was wonderful and it was idyllic, and you poor thing, and Jesus is still on the throne.
Yeah. Will be.
God is still present in this life.
Yeah.
There are beautiful things. You don't see them on the news.
Yeah.
But there are beautiful, beautiful things happening in this world, and we have opportunities to shine the light of God in the world around us, and that happens.
Yeah.
So for a senior, pointing other people towards the hope that we have in Christ, and the hope that we have for eternity, and the hope we have for the world and for the church. A pitfall would be forgetting that.
Yeah. All really important stuff to be aware of. What are some of the specific needs for folks in these seasons of life?
Oh, grace. Really. Well, and I think the needs are similar in all of them. Safe people to be vulnerable with, and people who are praying for you. Your 3 a.m. friends. I don't know if you've heard that phrase. Who are your 3 a.m. friends?
I've not heard that, no.
Who would you call? If you, aside from your spouse or a parent, like, who do you have a handful of people or a few people that you could call at 3 a.m. and you know that they'd be there?
Yeah.
Who are the people that you could just say, I just need a shoulder to cry on. I just need someone to talk to. I know I don't need any judgment right now. I just need a safe person to be with.
Yeah.
Who are the people that will pray for you if you ask them to pray?
Yeah.
Who really will pray for you. So those, the need for that in all the seasons are important. But in these transitions, this book I read recently was talking about the midlife transition, and said that transition and the young adult transition are the most significant change happens in those two, and the midlife transition is the more significant of the two because of the looking back. I found that really interesting, and the letting go and learning how to walk with God in a different way, in a you are enough, Jesus. All this stuff I built, all this stuff, you are enough. So that, I think I'm way off topic now.
No, that's okay.
I don't even remember the question.
We were talking about the specific needs of people in these various stages.
Yeah. So, support and grace, people who will listen to them. People need to feel like their words still matter and they still have influence. Yeah. Even, especially as they get older.
When I just think too of, like, I have one remaining grandparent that's still alive here on Earth, and I just know that she's lost most of her peers, and so she just needs that contact with people. So even, she lives in Arizona, so even though I don't get a chance to see her very often, like, I'm just reminded of the need to just call her up or FaceTime her and just give her that human connection, because she doesn't have connection much with many of her peers anymore, because they've passed away, or they're maybe have dementia and aren't able to converse anymore. And so we really, us younger generations, really need to be there for older generations, whether it's our grandparents or aunts, uncles, friends, neighbors. Really need to be there when we start recognizing that, okay, they've lost a lot of their peers. They've lost those people that they talk to. That's one of the great joys of my work is when I get to go visit our shut-ins, people to let them know that they're not forgotten, that their church hasn't forgotten them. And some of the people I visit haven't been here on a Sunday morning in 10 years. Because they can't. They can't be here. They can't drive anymore, or they can't walk into the building. So some of them are able to figure out the technology and watch online. Some have a hard time with that. But to know that somebody remembers them and will come and sit with them, means the world.
It does. It does. Yeah, it's so valuable. Just that, just takes. One visit will encourage somebody for weeks, for a long period of time, that they're not alone, they're not forgotten, they're not invisible.
Well, it's kind of funny because one of the last times I FaceTimed my grandma, I found out that she was like texting to a bunch of other people. Like there's like a Larson Women group text, and she was like, "Oh, Kevin FaceTimed me, and we talked about this, and he showed me the condo, and blah blah blah." And like she was just going on and on about it, and I was like, I didn't think it was that big of a deal, but it was.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, they really need that kind of companionship.
Yeah.
As they get into those years.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So practically speaking, how do you know if someone or yourself is not walking through these particular stages in a healthy way?
Yeah.
It'll look like a lot of things.
It looks
for
like a
different
lot
people.
of things. Yeah. I think in these later years, I think the mental and emotional health piece speaks to that quite a bit.
Yeah.
Just having a hard time letting go, or having a hard time receiving the grace of God for things that maybe you wish you would have done differently, or withdrawing. I think we talked about that before, but just kind of isolating and withdrawing in a not healthy way is a red flag. And chemical dependency, that some people turn to some addictive behaviors to mask some feelings that they're feeling. So that's not super healthy. Yeah, I think the mental health piece is pretty key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think too right now it's interesting because the current seniors, and especially like my grandma's age, my grandma's generation, they didn't talk about mental health.
Yeah.
And so to even convince them to even consider something like depression that they may need medication for, that's very foreign to a lot of people in that age group, because you didn't talk about that. And so it'll be kind of interesting to see like how my generation is when we're at that age. But yeah, that mental health piece didn't get talked as much about for a lot of them.
Yeah.
And I think too, we also have to remember what they're coming from, because sometimes things that seem really unhealthy to us, we can really explain as like, well, that's a generational difference. Like when I think it was 2021, my parents were helping my grandma move down from North Dakota down to Arizona. And as they were kind of helping clear out her previous living space, like my mom was finding like expired cake mix from like 10 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just like, is this a hoarding situation? Like, is this a red flag? Like, is this healthy? But we have to remember, like, my grandma was born in 1930 during the Depression.
Oh, sure.
You did not get rid of things unless you absolutely needed to. Like, it was, everything could be reused at some point.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of, we have to remember, okay, what's a generational difference and what's an unhealthy behavior?
Yeah.
And it can be really, the lines can be really blurry there, I think, which is complex.
True, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
So then the last question, I guess, is then how does this season of life intersect with spiritual development?
Yeah, hugely.
Yeah.
Hugely. Starting with the midlife transition, that letting go piece, I mean, that's the rubber meets the road there. You need to really release control of the life that has been and submit it all to God.
Yeah.
Everything you've been working on, it's all God's work. And what is yet to come, God will lead you in what's to come. But learning how to submit to God in more personal ways, perhaps, or deeper ways, or when things that you've had around you to give you an identity and purpose and value and whatnot, kids, work, to name just a couple things, when those no longer need you the way they used to.
It's a big change.
Yeah. So just really relying on God and realizing that God is enough. God is enough. It's a hard thing. And there's still, again, many joys and many people around you still, but there are some significant things that fall away a bit in that year. The golden years, that's where your faith becomes the most real if you're a follower of Jesus, because you're getting closer to heaven. And some days you may long for that. I talk to people who will say sometimes, what is God waiting for? Why am I still here? Like they just want to go. Yeah. Because most of their people are gone. They're what they want to do, they can't do.
I've heard my grandma say that.
Yeah. Or there's
I've heard my grandma say it too for like her husband. Like I remember when my grandpa had dementia and was being put into a nursing home, she was like, why doesn't God just take him?
Yeah.
Because he's not himself anymore. And so that can be really hard to watch too. And
yeah, for sure. And that's when, again, one of my favorite things I get to do is be around people who are nearing the end of their life, because I'm so encouraged. I'm like shockingly encouraged. I went to visit a man who died in June, so a few months ago. And the first time I went to see him after he was put on hospice care, I walked in and he and his caregiver were sitting at the table and he had oxygen on for the first time. And so I walked in, I said, hey, how you doing? And he said, I'm the luckiest man in the world. That's how I was greeted from a man who's in hospice care, who's now on oxygen, who will never leave his home again, and the luckiest man in the world.
Wow.
And I talked to somebody recently who got a cancer diagnosis that doesn't look very good, and checked in with him, and he said to me, I see God's thumbprint all over my life. I thought, so for me as a younger person, I am spiritually encouraged by these older saints who are nearing the ends of their lives, and they see God all over their life, and they have surrendered. They've got the letting go thing down.
Yeah.
They have surrendered their life with all the limitations that they're currently experiencing to God, and they're just living with the Lord in full trust and abandon. And of course they probably have sad moments that I don't hear. I mean, I'm sure that happens.
That's true of anyone ever.
Yeah. But still, in the midst of that, they're able to be an encouragement to me spiritually.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Being with somebody who's close to death, I don't know how anybody can deny that there's a life after this death. Yeah. Because I sit with people who they all but see Jesus when I'm in the room with them. Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing.
Well, I think too, just there's so much wisdom that they have to share, and just so many things that they've experienced. Like over the last couple of years, we've heard the phrase unprecedented way too many times. Yeah. And I'm sure like a lot of things are new even to a lot of our seniors. But still, they've seen so many things, and they have so much wisdom to give us. Like, I don't regret per se, but like, I just kind of wish I had spent more intentional time when I was younger with my grandparents, kind of hearing their wisdom on different things. Because, like I never lived near my grandparents, and so a lot of times when I was with them, I was also with my cousins who were my age, and so the priority was like, go hang out with the cousins, which is great. That's great. But I wish I'd kind of had more time with my grandparents to kind of talk about like, okay, what was this like when this event happened or that event happened or that season? And like, especially with my dad's dad, who was a pastor, this was his painting, which is part of why I have it here for those of you watching. And it just kind of like, I wish I had the chance. I mean, it was years after he died before I realized I was going to go into ministry. But I just kind of wish I had that to him to kind of go to and kind of ask him about his life and stuff like that. So I guess this is partly my encouragement to those of us who are younger to like really invest in spending time with people in these years, because they just have so much wisdom to share with us.
Right.
And they're eager to do so.
Yeah. That's one question I have for God when I see him face to face. Although I'm assured by a lot of people that once we see Jesus face to face, we won't have any questions. We'll just be glad to be. We'll just be in awe of being there. But if I were to have questions, like
I feel like I have a lot of questions.
But younger people who would benefit most from hearing the stories of their grandparents are wrapped up in themselves and aren't developmentally at a point where that's a value. Stereotypically, for sure. So
I was always more concerned, like, I want to go have fun with my cousins.
And that's appropriate for you. But every generation has that. People all say, oh, I wish I had, well, I know.
By the time I realized how much wisdom I could have gotten from my grandparents, they had either passed away or had dementia. And it was like, I missed that window. I mean, I still have some with my one grandmother, but
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So much that they can share with us. Well, like my grandma's, she'll often send emails to her grandchildren. Like she'll do the grandsons separately and then the granddaughters separately. And every email, she's imploring us to stay close to Jesus. And the way she phrases it is sometimes interesting.
Oh.
But yeah, I mean, she's still very much invested in praying for us. And so, I mean, it's really powerful to know that, like, you know, she has all of us on her mind all the time. And there's just such a beauty to that.
Yeah.
The ability to just pour into other people.
Yeah. The first time I met Kirk's grandmother, his mom's mom, we were engaged. So we went down to Iowa and visited her. And she opened up her door and we met. And then she said to me, "I've been praying for you your whole life." And I just share that often because it was so impactful on me. And I only knew her for a few years before she died. Yeah. And I didn't see her very often because she was out of state. But her impact on me, I still feel it, you know? Yeah. Somebody that I didn't even know was praying for me for the first 26 years of my life.
Yeah.
Holy buckets,
yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I want to be able to say that.
Yeah. And that just reminds me too, like, for those of you who are in your kind of golden years or your senior years, you can pour into a lot of people that aren't your grandchildren or aren't your children. Yeah. Like, I think of my friend Nikki, her grandma that we all knew as Nanny, she kind of became a surrogate grandma for like my entire friend group. Like we were always at their house in Lakeville. I remember one time we were like having a Nerf gun fight in her living room and like I was on the floor and suddenly she's standing over me with the Nerf bazooka just like pointed right at my face. Like she was great and she was just such an amazing example of just focusing on God and giving it all to God. And like she poured into my life, you know, even though she wasn't my grandmother. I knew her for years until she passed away last year. And like, just amazing godly legacy that she left behind. And like at her funeral, it was just incredible to watch her daughter and then her granddaughter friend. You could just see the legacy of faith just trickling down through both of them. And that was just so great to see.
Super cool.
Yeah.
You know, that's one of the beautiful things about being a part of a church is that a church is multi-generational.
Yes.
I mean, there are babies to 90s here at Faith Covenant, and where else do you get the opportunity to be with people who are in all of the generations we've talked about, or all the life stages or life seasons? They're all represented on every single given Sunday morning. Yeah. They're here. So you have an opportunity every week. Yeah. And multiple times in the week, we have opportunity to intentionally choose to be with people who are not in our season of life. Yeah. You know, we've got grandparents that serve in children's ministries, and our women's ministry team is going to be praying for all the young families. We're going to adopt a young family this fall and just
that's awesome.
Pray for them for the year. Yeah. So just there's ways to be involved at a church that you don't find in normal life. Yeah.
One like part of I don't know how many people at our church know this. If you're newer, you probably don't. But we have a chore corps that's mostly made out of people in this midlife transitions or golden years stage of life, and they help keep the church clean. Like they vacuum, they do the lawn, all the yard work, and they're here every week.
It's 2 hours of their week, and it makes a big difference.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like they're just serving our church in such powerful, tangible ways. Now, as just an advertisement for the chore corps, you do not have to be in that stage of life. You can join at any age. They'd be happy to have younger people as well.
We've had some 20s show up on occasion, and that's a cool thing to see.
Them serving side by side and doing all that together. So, and I mean, I just want to say thank you to all the people who are in their golden years at Faith Covenant. There are many people who have been here for decades that have just been faithful members of this church who have continually invested in this church and in the people here. It's already made a huge difference in my life, and I'm sure in yours too. Well, probably more so for you, since you've been here longer.
Just because I've been here a while,
Yeah. So, any last things that you want to share about these last two stages of life that we've been talking about today?
I don't think so. I think we covered it.
All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, we are all very thankful for Char and all the work that she does, and we're thankful for having you join us today and in the last couple of weeks to have this discussion about seasons of life. So,
my pleasure.
Yeah. And as always, if you have other comments or questions or topics you want us to address, you can email me. My email is in the notes section on the podcast information. So please let me know if there's other things that you want us to cover. So thank you for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Bye.